Hello, friends. So it is 30 minutes earlier than usual here at Brilliantly HQ for our Tuesday lives, but this is an extra special one, and we need a little bit more time. And we've been sharing about, hey there, that we're going to do this for a few days now. It's a reschedule from last month. I hope some of you will be joining. Simran and I, yes, so excited about today. Cooking together to make some vegan mac and cheese. Hi Jocelyn, hi Bonnie. All right, I just sent you the invite. Let's see. Hello.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm good.
Are you feeling all better?
Man, I tell you, January and February kicked my butt.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, following along, I just felt so sad for you having everybody be sick and then just keep getting hammered. The worst.
Well, we literally did everything we could for 2 years to prevent COVID, and then it finally caught up with us. So that was like all of January, and then I sent my son back to school, and then he picked up a bad case of RSV and, was coughing all over me. So I got that. So that was fun. So then it just ended up in like this like prolonged cough, which is finally better, but it was rough.
Oh my gosh. Well, I am so glad to see you back, and I think that's like one of the moments where it feels more important than ever to eat well and think about what you're putting in your body and try to help
Yes.
yourself heal on like every level.
Yes. It definitely reminds you when you're sick, it's like, okay, this is why I do everything I do. And that was probably about, like one of my biggest revelations after I had my surgeries. Because I was like, for 2 weeks, I literally could do nothing for myself. And that's when I was like, all right, this is why you show up every day and do that little bit for yourself.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm so excited, and I like started to prep because I don't know how I had never thought about how much prep has to happen if you're gonna like cook something while people watch you. But I got like overzealous. I'm like all measured, I'm all chopped, I'm ready to go.
Yes, awesome. I prepped most of the stuff too. I mean, this is honestly like such an easy recipe. We probably make it at least a couple of times. I make it a couple of times a month because my kids love it. But then every time I make it, I double or triple the recipe because it freezes so well. So the prep is super simple. So I'm glad you already did that because it won't take us long to make the recipe. So we'll just chat as we move
Awesome.
along.
Well, I'm gonna turn on my water for boiling noodles because my fantasy here is that I get to do like a giada and like try it at the end and be like, and then pretend like I'm only gonna eat that little sample. So when we turn it off, I can be like over the whole bowl.
Yes, yes. I love that we're doing this at lunch because this is like a two-in-one. We're ready
Yeah,
for, ready to eat right after.
it's so there's a
So,
really amazing vegan restaurant here in Rhode Island called Plant City, and
okay.
I've had some of their like cheese sauce on things before, and been like, I can't even imagine what's in this and why does it taste so good. And I saw your recipe and was like, all right, I can't wait to see if I can like do this at home now.
Yes, that's always the challenge is like how do you recreate like when you're trying to be more plant-based, how do you recreate like some of your childhood favorites? And that's literally the mission I've been on for the last 7 years since I like went more plant-based. And this cheese sauce was like one of the things that I needed to perfect because my husband loves mac and cheese.
Yeah.
I've been working on, I'm pretty proud of this recipe. So I'm hoping everyone is going to like it. And it's so easy, so easy to make. So, should we go through what we need or what do you think we should do
Yeah,
first?
so we both posted the recipe already. I'll share it again in the comments and in stories so people can see it if they want to like watch this and then just do it themselves. So I decided to use tofu. I I know you and I had talked about this before too. Um, I was told in the early 2000s when my mom was diagnosed that we should avoid all soy, and I had spent like over a decade being like, no soy, not like checking consumer packaged goods, like really trying to avoid it. And you've helped me learn about the benefits of soy, but I still don't cook with it very often. And so, and this is my first time with the silken tofu, so I just wanted to share. that I'm using the tofu and not the cashews with the beans. I would normally try the cashews, but I'm like, I want to learn to love soy because I spent so much time. Hello from Malaysia. Nice to have you here. So we both are using the same organic silken tofu.
Yeah. So maybe what we could do is as we start cooking, let me just go through all the ingredients in case anyone else is about to cook with us. And then after that, maybe we can talk a little bit about some soy, busting myths.
Love it.
So the base of this recipe is going to be some white potatoes and carrots. So essentially you steam your white potatoes and your carrots. And, it's about 2 cups and 2 cups. Oh, no, sorry. 2 cups and 1 cup of carrots, 2 cups of potatoes, 1 cup of carrots. And then to make it creamy, what I usually use is cashews, about 1 cup. And then we're going to replace that today with silken tofu. So silken tofu is a form of tofu that's great if you're trying to make something creamy. So it's great in soups. It's great in smoothies. It's great in sauces and dressings, and also for desserts, like if you're trying to make a mousse or something like that. So that's kind of your main thing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to saute some onion and garlic. And you have about 1 cup or one medium onion and about 2 cloves of garlic. And don't worry about like chopping everything finely because we're using a blender. So that's why it makes it super easy to prep this recipe because you don't have to worry about that. And then really all we need are our spices. So I have everything in here. So we have about 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of ground mustard powder, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, and half a teaspoon of cumin. So that's going to give us all our flavor. And then this is kind of the magic for most vegans when you're trying to recreate that cheesy flavor. So this is nutritional yeast. The biggest tip, because I had a coaching client recently say like, I gave her a couple of recipes to try out and she's like, oh, I love she's trying to do the same thing. She's trying to add more soy. So she's like, oh, I love the lasagna with the tofu crumbles. The cheese sauce was kind of interesting. And then I found out later that she used like baker's yeast. So definitely when you're cooking and trying to get that cheesy flavor, you're going to be using nutritional yeast, and it'll say it very clearly. The nice thing about this is if you're following mostly a plant-based diet, most of the nutritional yeast on the market is fortified with B12. So you'll get all your B vitamins. So that's kind of what's nice about it.
And it looks really different than baking yeast for anyone who's confused. Like if you saw them together, you wouldn't confuse it. Baking yeast is like little tiny kind of brownish tan granules, and nutritional yeast is like yellow and flaky, and it almost looks like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like if you had some it's almost like Parmesan-y looking, and I think it lends that same like robustness in flavor.
Yeah, I mean, she's very new to the kitchen, so I was like, I felt really bad that I didn't clarify that. So now every time I talk about nutritional yeast, I'm like, okay, must clarify this tip.
Yes.
And then really you're gonna add some. You just use low sodium veggie broth, and then you're gonna top it off with some lemon, and that's about it. And then you need your favorite pasta. And then we'll talk about the garnishes at the end. Just a tip on the pasta, because the cashew and the tofu are good for protein, but we're not using like that much. So it's not going to be a very high protein dish. So one of the things that I like to do, especially since this is like a go-to meal for my kids, is I like to use kind of a high protein pasta instead of typical wheat pasta. Oh yes, Banza. So there you go. There's 3 different brands. They're all great. Just to give you an idea, like this macaroni, it's made out of lentil flour, and 2 ounces, which is not even half a cup, will give you 14 grams of protein, and almost 1 cup will give you 25 grams of protein. So it's an easy way to kind of add protein to this dish.
Yeah, that's awesome. I picked this one because it had 20 grams of protein. I'm trying to not eat a lot of gluten. I do not have a gluten allergy. I don't have celiacs, but I have a thyroid issue, which I talk about sometimes on here. I have Hashimoto's syndrome, and I'm trying to figure out like the best way to eat so I feel good and don't feel.
Yes.
I can only describe it as hungover. Is like the time when I don't eat well. Since I've been diagnosed.
Yeah, and the only thing that you can do sometimes is get rid of something in your diet for 4 to 6 weeks and
try. Yeah, and gluten seems to be one that makes me feel terrible, but I'm hoping it's to be a good option. I'm excited to try it.
Yeah, and not everyone has like a true gluten allergy, like you said, like celiac, but there's a lot of wheat proteins that like gluten that we don't quite know about yet, so we can't test for them. So it's like there are a lot of sensitivities. So again, there's not a test for everything. So sometimes you have to try it out and see how you feel.
Cool. So I chopped a big onion, and I saw in the recipe that you were suggesting that you could like add pickled jalapenos at the end. So I used like 3/4. I made everything bigger. It's my Italian problem. Like I cannot follow a recipe. I'm like, no, more is going to be better. So I'm pickling onions and jalapenos because I had a really big red onion.
Nice. And honestly, I'm Indian, so I hear you there. You can also never have enough onion and garlic, in my opinion. So I agree with that. So, all right. So the way that I usually like to do this recipe is I usually like to prep my I usually like to saute my onion and garlic. So you can put a little bit of oil in a pan or a little bit of water or a little bit of broth, whatever you want to saute with. And let's just saute those. And I usually saute them for 3 to 4 minutes until they get like, you know, you get that translucency in the onions and you get that, you can smell the flavor.
And I saw, you know, like I watch all of your cooking videos because I've been watching cooking shows since I was a kid. I love food. I love food.
Oh my God. I am not that entertaining, but I'll take that as a compliment.
No, you totally are. And I really like that you saute with water. I'm using water too.
Or broth.
I'm adding a little bit of broth because I use a lot of olive oil, but you know, cutting out some fat here and there feels like a smart idea, especially after COVID. Packed on a few extra pounds. I have my first visit to my oncologist since COVID, actually, in May, and I'm like determined to be back in a way that she will be proud of because I felt like the world was ending and I gave up on a lot of things. So
that was all of us, man. I think I baked like banana bread and cookies like every other day that first year.
Yeah. I mean, it just felt like a thing to do, and it taught the kids how to do it too, and like gave them some life skills, but then there was a lot of tasty things to eat.
Yeah, I think like the thing for me with cooking with oil is just, like you said, it's an easy way to kind of cut out some of the calories. But the thing about oil when you're cooking with it, some oils are destroyed at very high heat, and so can create like pro-inflammatory compounds. So because, you know, when we're eating out or when we're eating snacks, there's oil in a lot of things. When I'm cooking, I just choose not to use oil. When I do use it, it'll be as a salad dressing. And the oil I typically choose is olive oil because it does have a lot of health benefits.
It's also so delicious, like especially if you're using it raw, because I think olive oil is one that breaks down at a high heat.
Yes.
But like there's so many different flavors of olive oil. So when you're putting it on a salad, it's so good.
Yes. Balsamic and olive oil are like my go-to combination. So we'll just saute this for a few minutes. And the one thing about when you're sauteing with water or broth is that you usually just have to keep an eye on it and add more, as opposed to with oil, you usually don't need to add more. So that it doesn't stick.
Right.
So while that's going, we can talk maybe a little bit about some of the soy myths. So it's interesting. You said in the early 2000s is kind of when you started here. So it's interesting because all of like the initial studies that were done in soy were done in rodents, and they all came out in like the 1990s. And over the last 20 years or so is really where we've gotten much more robust evidence in soy consumption in humans. So I think the easiest way to understand why it's good for you is to understand kind of the physiology first. So in humans, we have two types of estrogen receptors. You have an alpha receptor and we have a beta receptor. So our human estrogen binds to the alpha receptor, and that's true for breast cells. That's what you find in breast cells are the alpha receptors. Now in soy, we have what we call phytoestrogens. They're estrogen-like compounds. They're not estrogen, and they're known as isoflavones. And the two that are kind of like found to be the most beneficial isoflavones, they're known as genistein and didazein. So what happens is those actually have a preference for the beta receptor. And what happens in the body is when the soy phytoestrogens bind to the beta receptor, it sends a signal to the brain to say, oh, okay, the receptor is occupied. So what it actually does is it shuts down the alpha receptor. So what it really does in humans is it has an anti-estrogenic effect. So the best way to describe it is like, a lot of women who have like estrogen positive breast cancer, they're told to take tamoxifen afterwards. So tamoxifen is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. And what that means is essentially it shuts down that alpha receptor so that estrogen can't bind to it. And that's essentially what soy does. So it's got a neutral or anti-estrogenic, AKA protective effect for us, especially women that have had breast cancer. So yeah, there's tons of good evidence now showing kind of the protective effects of soy. I think the biggest thing to point out, though, when you're talking about soy is what kind of soy are you consuming? Because we live in a culture that eats a lot of highly processed food and processed soy, that's kind of where it starts to become bad for you. So think about like one of the most highly inflammatory oils that they use in most fast food chains is soybean oil. So it's very processed. Things like if you look at the like frozen section, like mock meats and a lot of the plant-based healthy alternatives have something called soy protein isolate. And that's also a very highly processed form of soy. So those are the things you want to kind of steer clear of.
Right. And that's easy because we're all trying to steer clear of all of the highly processed things in general, right? Like, I think especially in this community, it's like, obviously we all want to live our life and eat the things we enjoy, and maybe those things happen occasionally, but like that was the first thing.
Yeah, once in a while.
Yeah, that was the first thing I started cutting out. It felt easy to cut out. And when you look at the ingredients on like some of those things, it's like, okay, yeah, that can't be good for me. But
no.
So I know you were testing out soy in this recipe because you usually use cashews. Did you decide on the right amount of soy for this?
I used a cup on the weekend and it works perfectly.
Okay, awesome.
So a cup of silken tofu. And to be honest, afterwards I thought about it, and I actually have made this recipe with soy before, because when I was back home, my cousin's boyfriend, we made this recipe, but he's allergic to nuts. So we actually made it. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we used firm tofu. So you can use any kind of tofu. But I just think the silken tofu gives it that creaminess that's better, I think.
So the silken tofu is just softer. Is that right? Like that's the big difference?
Yeah, exactly. There's different consistencies of tofu, and tofu is just one form of minimally processed or whole food soy. So you can get it anywhere from silken, which is, the super softest type of soy, all the way to like super firm. So there's firm, extra firm, firm. And so like, for example, I would use extra firm or firm tofu if I'm making like a stir fry, and instead of chicken or instead of another meat, you're using tofu. And so if you like bake the firm tofu, it gives you this like nice meaty consistency. So yeah, okay, so it looks like they're done for me.
Yep.
So you want it to be kind of like translucent here. So I'm gonna put this in my blender. So
do you have your potatoes and carrots in the blender already?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that just
okay.
Now. The one thing I would caution, so if you're using, you can do this two ways. You can either make this in a blender, which is nice, or you can just make it a one pot thing. So if you're whatever you're steaming your carrots and potatoes in, after you're done steaming them, you can just put the carrots and potatoes in the pot, and then you can just add everything to the pot and use a really good immersion blender, and that, you know, that will save you from using like a Vitamix type of blender. But I just love the creamy consistency that this gives you, especially if you're using cashews, because you really want them to be completely blended.
Yeah.
And the only other tip I would say, oops, there goes some potatoes. So the only other tip I would give is that if your potatoes and carrots and onions and whatever else you're using, if it's extremely hot, wait for it to cool down before you blend it in like a Vitamix, because it's not good to blend super hot stuff in the blender.
So I have my potatoes, carrots, onions, garlic in the Vitamix. Should I give it a whirl?
Yeah, I would actually also add, you can just add everything. How's your Vitamix looking? Are you doubling the recipe? So is it really full?
Yeah, that's why it's full.
Okay. No, because I was going to say, it's always good to add a little bit of liquid,
Okay.
because that'll help it blend easier. Otherwise, sometimes if you're using just food, it can get stuck. So
Totally.
I would add some of your broth or your water or whatever you're using. So we're going to use about, if you're just making one batch, you're going to use about 2 cups of broth, and you can always add more broth or water at the end if you want to like thin it out a little bit. So we can blend it a little bit. Sorry about the noise.
Yeah, I'll do it too.
So the nice thing about this recipe is that you can use this as a base for macaroni and cheese, but you could also use this sauce for so many other things. Like I've put it on top of nachos before. We do it for nachos and dip. So you can make it into a spicy queso if you just add chili powder to it.
Are you seeing that question?
Yeah, so you can use cashews if you're not allergic to nuts. That would be great. We're actually doing it with soy. I normally make it with cashews. So you could use it as you could use it in tacos and, you know, burritos, enchiladas, anywhere where you would want like cheese. So it makes a great alternative. So about 1 cup for me, when I measured it, was about half this packet. So that's why I'm just putting half of it. So I just put all my spices. Again, it's 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of mustard powder, ground mustard powder, half a teaspoon of cumin, and 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika.
I'm really testing the capacity of my vitamins here.
Yeah, it looks like you're really full over there.
I know. I might need to take
sometimes what I do is if I'm double or tripling the batch, I'll mix everything in the big pot, but then I will blend it in batches.
I might have to go back and do that. All right, I'm totally going to do that. Good call.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have told you if you were doubling it.
No, that's okay. I think
so.
I think you could have done it, but no need to break my Vitamix on IG Live.
No, please don't do that. That is like such a vital kitchen tool. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this 1 tablespoon of lemon in, and then I'm gonna put the nutritional yeast. So this is kind of what'll give it that nice yellowy flavor, because the carrots make it kind of orangish. So when you put this in there, it'll make it more like yellowish. So I can't remember. I think I said 6 tablespoons. Um, Um, so yeah, I think the other thing that we can talk about then are, we talked about avoiding ultra processed soy. So what are the whole food sources of soy that you can use? And I pulled out a couple. So we talked about tofu. You can also actually just get whole soybeans. And this brand is great. It's actually got black soybeans, but they also come as white soybeans. But if you look at kind of the nutritional content of it, it's pretty amazing. So for half a cup of beans like this, and I'll sub this for black beans sometimes, you get really healthy unsaturated fat. You get 6 grams of fiber for half a cup, 11 grams of protein, minimal sodium, no cholesterol, no added sugar, and it's a great source of iron, magnesium, and zinc. And calcium. If you're eating tofu, especially because it's usually set in a calcium base. So that's one way you can easily incorporate whole food soy. This is something else I love. These are dry roasted edamame. So it's kind of like instead of eating nuts, you eat a handful of these. They're awesome. And kind of along the same line is these guys. So these are edamame. So these are baby soybeans. So if you go to like Asian restaurants, you usually get them in like the pod and they're salted really nice.
Yeah, I love those.
So edamame is really awesome because it's a great source of, like I said, fiber, protein, and lots of phytonutrients.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how do they take those beans and make tofu? Do you know like the actual process?
So, well, not the exact process because I've never done it, but the idea is that there's the two kind of whole form, minimally processed forms of soy are what one is tempeh and the other is tofu. And tempeh, if you look at it, I don't know if I have any in my fridge right now, but you basically find it in the store. It's like a bar like this. And if you look at it closely, you'll see kind of crushed soybeans. So tempeh is kind of crushed whole soybeans, so it'll look like this, but it's like crushed into like a bar.
Yep.
And the tempeh will give you an even meatier consistency if you're looking for. So a lot of times people will use tempeh as a meat alternative, and it's really, really good. Whereas tofu is actually made out of soy milk. So it's think about, it's kind of like, I think it's curd, like I don't know the exact process, but it's made out of a soybean milk base, whereas tempeh is made out of the whole soybean. That's kind of the best way to describe it. And then edamame, this is kind of how it comes. This is like baby soybeans.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I always wondered that. And it's like, when I think it just looks so processed, but it is,
So
like
it's, if you're talking about a whole food, technically a whole food is something that's never, its original form has never been changed. So this is a whole food. Like the actual bean would be a whole food. The edamame would be a whole food. Tofu technically would be a minimally processed form of the whole food. So it's still got all of the content, but it's been, the shape and the form is different. Versus soy protein isolate is like they're just taking out a very, type of thing within the whole food, and then they're putting it and packaging it into a powder or a mock meat or something. So that's highly processed. So if you go from whole food to ultra processed, it's like every time it's changed, it becomes more processed. So what you want to do is eat either whole forms or minimally processed forms.
Awesome. So I boiled some of my Banza noodles while we were blending. You know what I didn't add was the lemon juice.
Sorry, I'm blending.
No, that's okay. I'm going to do it again too.
And I usually just try to scrape the sides so that it gets everything. So if I'm making like an adult version of this, which in our house just means whatever you want to add, you add from on top. But if you like if kids were not eating this, what you could do is just blend the jalapenos or peppercino or something chili powder in here to make it a little bit spicier.
Oh, yum.
All right. Check this out.
Oh my God, it's
really
so
good.
yummy. So
It smells really good.
yeah, it really does smell so good.
So this is how I would top it. Is if you really want a nice kick, you add the diced jalapenos either inside. You could blend it, and you can take some of the jalapeno liquid and put it in there. It's really so good. And the other day we had it with this, which is pepperoncini.
Yep.
Oh, it's so good. It was really good.
So I pickled my own.
Oh, yum.
Which, let's see. I don't want to tip the bowl's really full. I'm like a little afraid to try it. The jalapenos were so spicy. I had like showered and later and then touched my eye like hours later, and it was,
oh God,
yeah, really stupid.
Okay, I have some pasta in my pot, so I'm gonna pour it so you can see how creamy it is.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, it's really amazing.
And like we were talking, but imagine if we were not talking, like it's so quick to make.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay.
So thanks to you, my kids now have their lunch ready for tomorrow.
Well, I love it. I love knowing that since I couldn't help myself and I doubled it, that it freezes really well.
It does.
Here, I'll do some show and tell too. I'm gonna eat mine right now.
Yeah, I'll have a bowl with you.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm. Also, I bet the jalapenos blended in there would be awesome.
Oh my God, if you like spicy food, it really is. That's how me and my husband like to eat it.
And do you add veggies? Like typically when I
my
kids eat mac and cheese as a meal, I either put like frozen peas into the pasta water at the very end or broccoli.
Yep.
But do you have any tips for adding more veggies?
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about this is if your kids are extremely picky, this sauce is literally made with a, veggie blend. And if you want to be, if you want them to eat more veggies and they just won't, the other vegetables you could probably put in here without changing the taste is cauliflower. So you can have a blend of cauliflower, white potato, and carrots. And that in itself is like, you don't even need to add veggies on top. But what mixes really good in here is steamed broccoli. We've done mushrooms on top. We've done green peas. And then you can even make it into like a more traditional baked mac and cheese casserole. That's what I do. Like during Thanksgiving, I'll make this and then I will put breadcrumbs on top and then bake it. And it's like so good.
So I am actually having some people over for dinner tonight. And I was actually going to ask you that. Since I made it all and I boiled the noodles, would it bake well? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Awesome.
The thing about baking it, though, is add extra sauce because in the oven, the sauce will dry up.
Yeah.
So just add extra sauce and that'll make it really, really good. But this is like so good. It's so creamy.
Yeah, I can't get over how much it looks just like noodles. My kids aren't terribly picky, but I still think that when something looks really different than what they're used to, then their first response is like, no, I don't want that. But this looks just like mac and cheese.
Right, exactly.
Really good. Well, Thank you so much. Does anybody who's watching still have questions? I think you did a really helpful job talking about soy. I know we've all heard different things, but
I think the biggest thing, just and we've talked about this before, is like, you know, and I'm a conventionally trained doctor, like I'm triple board certified, so I don't lack any knowledge in kind of conventional medicine, at least general medicine. But I will say, like, when we were trained, most of us, I think the statistic is over 4 years of medical school, most of us get less than 20 hours of nutrition education. And that's really like, you know, most of what I remember is like biochemistry, like which vitamins do you need as cofactors for different cellular processes. So we don't really learn true clinical nutrition. And yet, when most people are diagnosed with an illness or at risk for a certain illness, the first thing they'll ask their doctors is, what can I eat? What can I do in my life to reduce my risk? And most doctors don't have a good answer, and when they do give you something, it's usually not evidence-based. And so I think when it comes to things like this, it's okay to do your own research and look at the evidence and read all of it and bring it to your doctor, because you're actually educating them and then you're helping other people, right? We talked about this a lot, and that's what I did for myself. I asked that exact question to my oncology team, and none of them, you know, they still had the same idea here that, you know, you should avoid soy. And again, it's your doctors are not the end all and be all. Just remember that they're following the science for the latest breast cancer drugs and the latest breast cancer surgeries and all of that, but they're not necessarily following the latest nutritional science.
Right. I think we forget that you guys are people too, that like you're trained in a very specific thing. And then obviously we're all seeing specialists, especially people who are watching this and in this community. And that doesn't mean that, you know, like you wouldn't go to an eye doctor if you needed a heart transplant. It's like we can't expect that all of you know everything. And I think to your point, like the more research we do as patients and bring to the table, the better. Because look at, I already have food in my hair, classic. But I think that's such good advice to do the research, to find out and to share it with your doctor and not pretend like you're not doing something that they don't know about.
So there have been hundreds of studies, but if somebody wanted like one solid review article, last year around this time there was an awesome review article known as, it's a meta-analysis, which means they look at tons of studies. So they looked at over 400 studies, and the biggest concern with soy is always, is it an endocrine disruptor, right? Does it interrupt normal hormone function in the body? And so this was a great analysis, and what they saw was what we talked about earlier. Like, not only does it reduce risk of breast cancer in women that have already had breast cancer, but there's some speculative data that girls that are, you know, if they eat whole food soy sources before reproductive age, they can reduce their adult onset risk of breast cancer by 25 to 50%. Wow. And to me, that's mind blowing, because I have a daughter. I know you have a daughter, and in the back of our minds, you know, it's always like, okay, you know, they might have this gene mutation that we have. What can we do to reduce their risk? And this is an easy, healthy way to do it, right? Totally. A lot of men are worried about man boobs. That's what you hear all the time. But what the study showed is that it doesn't have any effect on male testosterone or estrogen levels. What else? Menopause. Menopause is huge, right? Like, it's so uncomfortable, the vasomotor symptoms that a lot of women get. So the studies have shown that women that eat more soy have a reduction not only in the frequency of hot flashes, but also the severity. So again, another great thing that you can do in your everyday life to improve your quality of life. Yeah. And then thyroid, you mentioned the thyroid. This study, what it showed was that, so people that have a normal functioning thyroid, as long as they're eating enough iodine in the regular amount of soy that most of us would consume in a day, you know, 1 to 2 to 3 servings a day, does not interrupt, you know, thyroid function. The one thing about patients that are hypothyroid is that it can interfere with the absorption of synthroid. But that is true for a lot of other medications and some other foods. And that's why, you know, most doctors will tell you always take synthroid on an empty stomach. So as long as you're taking in enough iodine, and as long as you're taking your synthroid on an empty stomach, if you're hypothyroid, it should be fine to consume.
Yeah, I take mine. I get up at 5 a.m. and take it, and then go back to sleep for an hour.
Nice.
As empty as can be. Yeah, well, that was super helpful. I'm so excited to serve this later, and I'll share some pictures. We'll both share the recipe again, and obviously, like, if anybody has questions or wants more recipes, please follow Dr. Simran. And if you're having trouble for some reason finding her, reach out to me. And thank you so much for the time. This was really awesome.
No problem. Yeah, I'd love to do it again. Let me know. It'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Take good care. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Happy eating.
You too. Bye.